Episode 310, Andrew Laws, founder of YesCO.
My favorite mistake is starting a web hosting company that I was about to sell, but was destroyed by hackers.
I'm Mark Graban. This is My Favorite Mistake. In this podcast, you'll hear business leaders and other really interesting people talking about their favorite mistakes. Because we all make mistakes, but what matters is learning from our mistakes instead of repeating them over and over again. So this is the place for honest reflection and conversation, personal growth, and professional success. Visit our website at myfavoritemistakepodcast.com. To learn more about Andrew, his company, and more, look for links in the show notes or go to markgraban.com/mistake310. As always, thanks for listening, and now on with the show. Hi, welcome to My Favorite Mistake. I'm your host, Mark Graban. Our guest today is Andrew Laws. He founded an SEO agency called YesEO.io. He's been, as he calls it, battling SEO for over 25 years. So I think we're going to be able to talk about that later in the episode. Andrew is the host of a podcast. It's called the Business Amplifier Podcast. And he says when he's not in the office helping clients grow, he can be found in the studio or on stage making very loud noises. So Andrew, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm okay, Mark. Thank you for welcoming me on. It's a nice little, it's an oddly nice little thing hearing somebody else talk about you while you're here. I quite like that. I'm not sure what that says about me.
It's human nature, I think. We like to hear our own name, and we like to hear, I think, about ourselves. I've got to ask a question before we jump into anything involving mistakes. What you got to tell us? What do you mean by very loud noises?
Very loud noises. Well, I play bass guitar, and I also play guitar. There's one just behind me. But I also make electronic music. Now, guitars, I can kind of play. Electronic music, I've never really figured out how you're supposed to do it. But the equipment is very, very loud. You'd have to work hard to be loud with synthesizers and drum machines and things. You just have to press a button and then stand back and look confused, or just nod knowingly, just to hide the fact you don't know what's actually going on.
So you've been doing that as a hobby, or at any point professionally? I know you've recorded some albums.
Yeah, I've always been in the studio recording albums. I've made some money, certainly not enough to live on. I think I missed that curve. If I had been much better than I am, then or if I had some talent. The secret to being in a band is always be the least talented person in the band. And I figured that out too late. So my bandmates now are amazing. But if I had met them 30 years ago, I might have actually made a career out of music.
Well, that sounds like the general business advice of surround yourself by people who are smarter than you or better than you at their jobs, huh?
I find that very easy.
All right. So, Andrew, let's jump into the main question we usually start with. What's your favorite mistake?
My favorite mistake is starting a web hosting company that I was about to sell, but was destroyed by hackers and involved the Metropolitan Police, the London police people. So,
well, gosh, tell us more of the details of the, so how did hackers get in, or is that what the police were having to investigate? Or tell us more of what that meant to you in the business.
I'll give you a very brief version of the story because it will count towards why I think this is my favorite mistake. So, as you know, I'm a musician, and I started a company making buttons for bands and sold loads of them, absolutely loads of them. So I then thought, this is all whilst running an SEO agency. I thought, do you know what? A lot of these bands don't have anywhere to keep their websites. So I started a web hosting company, and it did really well. I had 80 or 90 bands were using my service. And then one day the server was playing up, and I shut it down. You're not supposed to shut down web servers. And I got an email, and it came through. It's from somebody called Colonel Root, and he'd sent an email from a major bank because it had the major bank's domain name. And it said, "Ha ha, got you. What do you think you were doing trying to kick me out of your server?" Just to let you know I'm watching you. I'm paraphrasing. Just to let you know I'm watching you. And when you get the server running again, I'm going to destroy it again. And I was thinking, well, yikes indeed. I was thinking then I had people threatening to sue me. It was not fun, not a fun time at all. And I was having a conversation with an associate, a developer guy, and he'd said, "Do you know what? I know the person who does consultancy on computer security for the UK government. Do you want him to have a look at the remains of your web server?" And I thought, well, why not? He had a look and he said, "I think we've got quite a lot of evidence here." So he said to me, "Do you mind if I contact the Metropolitan Police? We have a weird thing with the police in this country. The London police had just started a department to look after the entire country because we're a very, very small country." And the Metropolitan Police contacted me by just turning up on my doorstep, even though they're like from 100 miles away. And they said, "Yeah, we want to pursue this." And there was a 2-year investigation. Loads of really interesting things happened. And then there was a court case. And in the court case, 2 people were convicted. And one of the people who was convicted was somebody who was training to be a lawyer, but he also happened to run a website that trained criminals how to commit fraud and how to hack. So the police were very excited. He didn't go to prison. He got what we call a suspended sentence. I don't know what it'd be in the States, but you get. I
think we use that same phrase. Yeah.
So you have been convicted, but you're not going to go to prison unless you get caught for something else, I guess. And so I shut down not only that company, but the SEO company I had at the time as well.
Did you ever figure out, or did the police figure out, or did these criminals admit their motivation? Like they didn't come after you. Like nowadays you hear a lot about ransomware attacks where people want Bitcoin to turn things back on. Was it just digital vandalism? Was it just for thrills?
We'll never know for sure. I never met the hackers. I never met them in person. The police wanted to keep me away from them, which sounds bad. No, they didn't want any interaction. From what we can gather, they were using my server as a part of a relay. So setting up, you'd call it the dark web now. So setting up a chat system. And if you set up a chat system on the dark web, you don't just go to GoDaddy and get a server. You hack it and use other people's servers. And he thought I'd spotted this. And he thought this is all guesswork, but fairly well informed. We think he spotted that he think I had spotted him. Yeah. So out of malice, decided to destroy the whole server. And it came out in court that there was one main guy, him and his friend they'd started a campaign of harassment. They were harassing me. So they were ringing me up and leaving empty phone calls. Back when landlines, you used to pick it up and you go, "Hello."
Yeah.
That happened all the time because the phone system where I live was terrible anyway. But I turned out in court, they were doing all these things to wind me up and harass me. And I was completely oblivious to all of them. Because each time they found chat logs between these 2 guys talking about and planning and actually executing all these things to try and make my life miserable. And I was completely oblivious. These chat logs, LOL, just sent a few more heavy breathing phone calls to Andrew. I didn't know. Yeah. So I think they put in a lot of work actually that didn't pay off for them because I was completely oblivious to it.
Yeah. Well, and so back to the beginning of the story, was the server just overloaded because of the stuff they were doing? Was that the symptom that you saw that led you to shut down the server?
No, we did a security audit. I mean, this isn't a web server that my background originally is in building servers. So it wasn't a server that was run like a Chernobyl or something. It was well looked after. And I think they spotted me doing the security audit and started messing with stuff. And I fixed the computer, but when I brought it back up, they set every single file on the server to read only, which effectively not only kills the server, but makes it impossible to recover. It's dead. It's just gone. There's nothing you can do. Well, it certainly wasn't back then. So they were very thorough. And so malice, I guess, and frustration and annoyance. I guess that's why they did it.
So I could understand how that destroyed the hosting business. You mentioned you also shut down an SEO company you had at the time. What was the connection there?
I was broken by it. Essentially, I'd built the business for 10 years and poured myself into it at the same time as doing lots of other things. I was younger than I am now. And I just realized the fragility of it. And at the same time, I found out I was going to become a parent for the first time. And I just thought, I'm done. I'm finished. That's it. If it can be taken away so easily, and it was such a dark, upsetting, miserable time to go through. His close friends who were hosting with me were threatening me with legal action. Yeah. And the Metropolitan Police were good, but being involved in a 2-year police investigation it's not a lot of fun. Right. So that was it. I was just, no, I've had enough. And that's why it's my favorite mistake. Because what I did with a very brief pause, one of my clients gave me a job very kindly. With a very brief pause, I realized that it was possibly one of the best things that had happened to me. Because I started in business in my early 20s, 22, I think I was. No guidance, just going hell for leather at it, just running at all problems face first, working, I don't know how many hours every week, always exhausted, never having enough time for my girlfriend, who's now my wife, just to give you a hint at a happy ending here. Yeah. And I realized that if I hadn't have had the brakes slammed on in such a total way, I think I probably would have ended up as a very unhappy, very unwell, possibly dead person, because I would have worked myself into the ground. But having that pause, having that imposed upon me, gave me the opportunity to step back and look at my life and go, do you know what? I do want to run a business, but I now know with total clarity the things I'm not going to do and the mistakes I'm not going to repeat. And to this day, I haven't. But yeah, I honestly, if those two guys, they were 18 years old, if they hadn't have done that, then I wouldn't be where I am. And the police were already confused at the end of it. They wanted me to give a statement, saying how pleased I was. And I didn't. I gave a statement saying 2 young men have a chance to look at their direction and decide if they want to make some changes. And the police were quite frustrated by that, I think. but I still believe it to this day. I wouldn't say I'm grateful to them, but I'm certainly glad it happened.
Yeah. The police wanted you to sound more thankful to them than you were empathetic toward the hackers.
They wanted. They were lovely. I've got nothing bad to say about them at all. But they wanted me to start going to conferences, to cybersecurity conferences, to give talks about how great the police were, because they were new. It was. Can you believe this is 2010? This happened. 29. It doesn't matter. It's a while ago, but there was no significant funding for cybersecurity at a police level in the country at the time. They were brand new. There was like 5 people looking after the country. Yeah. So I sympathized with them, because having a business owner go to conferences and say, these guys fixed something, would have been really useful. In the end, I went to a recording studio and recorded a statement and just said, look, you can have this copyright free, do what you want with it. But all the newspapers, the tabloids in the UK, the story they were running with was basically little urchins destroy hardworking man's business, which, they did destroy the hosting business. I don't hold them directly accountable for me shutting down the other one. I was just done,
Yeah. So, I mean, were there other lessons or things that would be hard, about, let's say, how the hackers were able to get in? I mean, were there things that you learned to do differently when it came to web hosting, or are things just different in 2025 where we've got cloud platforms and hosting that we don't have to do ourselves, that hopefully has better security, more redundancy, better backups?
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
This was still an age when WordPress hadn't really become as popular as it is now, or not just WordPress, any other the cloud systems like Squarespace and whatever.
Yeah.
But when I have this conversation with people, I think the one thing I want people to take away is that you need to use the maximum of any security you've got, because I get contacted still a lot when somebody a friend of the family or someone I know's grandma or somebody says, "Oh, my Facebook page has been hacked." I'm always like, it hasn't been hacked. You've just got a terrible password. Because that's the truth. Our server was incredibly tight. In fact, the guy, my upstream guy, the guy I rented the server off, he ended up doing security consultation for the National Computer Crime Squad. So we were good. We were hot. We were really good.
Sure.
It's just that websites were terrible. They're really insecure.
Yeah. So our guest again, Andrew Laws. Thank you for sharing that story. It sounds like it was a really hard time to go through, and I'd like to hear your telling of how and when you felt ready to go again, and tell us the story of starting YesEO in terms of new approaches or things that you were doing differently.
Sure thing. So with a pause and go and work for this company, who are still clients of mine, and spending time with the managing director who was very experienced and very wise, and I learned a great deal from him, I realized the biggest mistake in the entirety of the previous 10 years of running this company is that I was doing everything myself. Mm-hmm. Yep. And as a business owner, I was busy, but it's very, very hard to delegate work out to other people. If I had known to delegate, none of that would have happened, because the security would have been, right, get the company making enough money to pay someone to look after the security. Get this part of the company profitable enough that somebody else can come in and do that. And you run a business, the worst threat to that business is
we'll be back with more of My Favorite Mistake just after this.
Do absolutely everything you can in the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We joked earlier about kind of always being the worst person in the band. Oh, and actually you then said it's the same with business, always be the least talented person. If you think you're always going to be the best and you can't trust other people, at some point you're going to come unstuck. And I'm sorry to anyone listening to this who needs to hear that. Mm-hmm. But if that's resonating with you, go with your heart. You've got it in you. Just find the right people.
Yeah. That's a story or a theme we've heard from many guests on the podcast. Out of roughly 300 episodes, maybe a dozen, this is off the top of my head, maybe a dozen guests have had some sort of variation of the I didn't delegate, I was trying to do it all myself. And that either leads to, like you said, not having the best capabilities or that someone else might bring who's an expert in a space, and or people getting burned out just from the effort that it takes to do it all yourself.
And I'm reminded all the time, one of my team, I'm the only full-time person. The rest of my team are part-time. That's something else I didn't understand. You can find people who don't want to be full-time, and that means you can generally be closer to affording them. I hired someone she's a qualified proofreader, and I can proof. I've written books. I know how to write. I know how to edit other people's work. And I realized very quickly she could do what would take me 2 or 3 hours. She can do in about 15 minutes. Just that time alone is like, why was I doing that? She's so much better and so much faster.
Yeah. There's the efficiency, the effectiveness, and just the opportunity cost of your time, which I imagine. So tell us, in your role as a founder, and how do you allocate your time or decide what's the best use of your time as opposed to what you would delegate or contract out?
It's a never-ending challenge to try and do that. I've started working with a digital delivery consultant, a guy called John Munson, and it's his job to go into companies and help people with things like this. What I tend to do is be very aware that if I spot a job and think, that will just take me 30 seconds, I'll just get it done, they're the ones that you should probably delegate. So it's the ones that I think are going to be very easy, because the big tasks, like I've got a developer on my team, and if some programming needs to be done, I'm not even going to attempt that. I'm just going to say his name's Matt. I'll say, Matt, can you take this on? Let me know how long you think it's going to take you. Those jobs aren't the threat. The threat are I could just do that, or I could just email that client, or I could just. They're the dangerous words. I could just.
Yeah. That sounds like an interesting lesson to learn, because I mean, it sounds counterintuitive, where part of me thinks if you say, well, that would only take 30 seconds, that's, and maybe that turns out to be an inaccurate assessment. Sometimes maybe that's the trap, but the time of doing it versus the time of explaining to someone else what needs to be done, that's part of the trade-off, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. But the big change in my business for that is I started writing, when I decided to start getting team members rather than just working with freelancers, I started writing a massive operations manual, and I realized I was spending so much time writing step 1, step 2. So I did some work with an efficiency consultant, whose name I've forgotten, alarmingly. And she just said, what are you doing? Use Loom. So Loom, for anyone who doesn't know, is a system where you record, you press a button and Loom starts recording your screen. It puts your face in the bottom corner and it records everything you do. So we do everything with Loom now, and we store it in our Notion, which we use like a wiki. So if there's a task to do, if no one else in the business can do it, it's quite easy for me to go, well, I am going to do this, but I'm going to record it so I can put it somewhere central. And if somebody else needs to do it, I can say, well, go watch me do it. So I'm not even writing instructions for things. So yeah, that's the danger. My thing I like most at the moment for saving time makes me feel like I've come full circle and I'm back to being a 1950s style boss, because I've started dictating my emails to my assistant. I just fire up WhatsApp, press record and go, email from this person, just reply saying this, and I can clear my inbox in 2 or 3 minutes.
Interesting.
Which
now,
is
unlike the 1950s, this assistant isn't using one of those old timey what was that machine called?
Typewriter.
Well, not even there's the typewriter. I guess I'm thinking of like a courtroom.
Stenographer. Yeah,
stenography was the word I was trying to think of. But but it's funny you talk about going back in time to the 1950s. As a quick aside, do you know the movie RoboCop?
Oh yes, I'm a child of the 80s. Yeah, I'm a kid of the 80s, so I remember RoboCop.
Same here. I think there was a remake, and I refuse to admit that exists. But the original film that was made in the 80s, I think it was set in roughly the year 2035.
Oh.
And the things that they got so wrong about the future, there's a corporate boardroom scene. And for one, there's a woman taking notes using one of those stenography machines. And then the other thing that cracks me up is that I think every single person in the room is smoking a cigarette.
Oh God. I was watching something the other day and thinking just how many people smoked.
Yeah.
Just how many. Smoking's been illegal in the UK, I think nearly as long as it's been illegal in America. And I did some work in another country, and I took the elevator and somebody got in and lit a cigarette. And I was so flabbergasted. I was so dumbfounded. I didn't say anything. Poor person probably just saw me just staring at him going like, what?
Yeah. You don't even know what to say.
Yeah.
It's a mistake to light up a cigarette, or if somebody were to try doing that on an airplane anymore, that would be
smoking
surprising.
On planes. I smoked on planes. I used to smoke, and that seems wild.
Yeah,
that seems absolutely wild.
Yeah, it sure does. So, Andrew, how did you get into doing SEO, search engine optimization work? I mean, what pulled you into that, or what appealed to you?
It was quite a practical thing that did it. So early days of the internet, which here in the UK, I'd say was probably a couple of years after the States, about 1998, when it was starting to just become, okay, this is a thing, this is a normal thing. Big hosting companies didn't really exist in the same way. So I was doing network support. I was the only employee for this American guy. And we thought, we ought to build some web servers and just to see what it's about, to see how to do it. So I built a couple of servers and I drove them off somewhere and locked them in a cupboard, which is what the internet seemed to be like at the time.
Yeah, right.
And then we started building websites. We just with front page or Notepad or something, started putting together very rudimentary websites for people. And I can remember thinking, who's going to see these websites? The thinking at the time was everyone would put their web address on their business card, and they'd meet people in person like, hey, nice to meet you. Go and have a look at my website, which I just thought that seems insane. That's bonkers, because how many cards are you going to hand out, or how many times is your truck with your web address on it going to have to drive past somewhere before anyone looks at your website? And that's when I discovered things like Alta Vista and Hotpot and DMOZ and all the search engines, and this new one that people seem quite excited about called Google. I thought that's never going to catch on with a silly name like that. So I started to learn it, started to do it, and it was very easy back then, if I'm honest. And then I mentioned earlier that I started a button making company for bands, and I realized that I only had enough money to buy the machine, like the big clamp thing. Yeah. But if I could make sure that my badge company was found ahead of everyone else when someone typed badge, then I'd have a going concern. So I did the SEO, and within about 3 months, the demand was so high, I sold 80% of the company to a friend and just stepped back from the manufacturing. And I thought, this is like a David and Goliath story, this is. And I still love this about SEO. If you've got the intelligence, and if you really care, and you really want to do well, and you ignore the silly SEO tricks that people do, then any size company can beat a multinational in some way, or can take ground from them at least. And that's still what excites me. Most of the companies I work with aren't huge companies. They're small mom-pop operations, but we can use intelligence to get them ahead of people with much, much larger budgets. And 27 years later, I'm still doing the same thing now.
Yeah. But that challenge, I imagine, is ever evolving. It's said that, let's say, the Google algorithms are always changing, and boy, I get pitched all the time as a small business who, people who claim to understand the algorithms, which I'm a bit skeptical about. But they'll say, look, the rules are changing, the game has changed. What worked in the past doesn't work anymore. I mean, what's your reaction to any of that?
If you treat SEO as a game and as something where you're trying to fool Google, then the same things that worked before don't work now. If you treat SEO as a natural amplification of all the good things in your business, you can ignore algorithm changes. All Google are doing with their constant algorithm changes is getting better at sniffing out the junk.
Yeah.
SEO can amplify brilliant companies. It can't conjure nonsense about rubbish companies. So it is changing, but not in a way that anyone who does it right really cares about. I run a networking group called the SEO Collective Networking Group, and nobody in that group cares about algorithm updates. We might be interested for like academic reasons. Kind of go, oh, that's very interesting. Yeah. But you said about people claiming to understand the algorithm. Something I don't think enough people realize is that Google doesn't understand the algorithm.
And why is that?
It's so big and so sprawling. They're quite open about it. There's a guy called John Mueller who works for Google, and he's constantly answering questions on LinkedIn all over the place. And people say, now, this specific thing happened. What in the algorithm did that? And not just him, other people at Google go, we don't know. It's possibly because of this. Yeah. So if Google don't know, then somebody cold outreach contacting you saying, hey, I know the algorithm. No, you don't.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, Andrew, the biggest mistake that people or companies make trying to improve their search engine result presence. Is the biggest mistake the silly tricks, or are there other mistakes that are pretty common?
There's two ways I can answer this. There's the traditional way, which is saying, by doing black hat SEO, by doing the silly tricks, by buying links, that's the biggest mistake. The reality is that's not in the wheelhouse for most business owners. Most business owners, biggest mistake they make is treating their website as a fit and forget thing. Like you might print a paper brochure and you go, well, I've got 5,000 copies of this brochure now. I'm not going to change anything in that. If you treat your website the same way, it's probably the biggest mistake you can make. Because the needs of your customers change. And your website should just be a reflection of the questions that your best salespeople get asked. It's a very a very brutal way of looking at it. If you want to know what to put on your website, speak to your own sales guys. Or if you're a one-man band, think, what are the questions people ask me? Because they're the same questions that people type into Google. Put the question and the answer on your website. Yeah, the biggest mistake is just to fit and forget. Don't do it.
Yeah. So there's a software company, Kinexus, that I've worked with over the last 12, 13 years. And Kinexus, it's been a very sustained effort. There was some coaching from a marketing advisor, and we have a great marketing team. I think one thing we've learned at Kinexus, and we do very well in the search engine result placement, is that it came from, in our experience, for one, there's no overnight success. It's taken many, 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 many years, and it's a function of a lot of really good, authentic, human-written content. I think a lot of it, to your point, of what are the questions people are asking, what are the things they're talking about, not even just directly related to I want to buy software, but just answers to questions that our customers have in their domain and in their industry. And I think that's served Kinexus very well. I would describe that as, a content-driven strategy as opposed to any sort of tricks or manipulation.
It's going to continue to serve them. In fact, it's going to, in the age of AI, it's going to become more important. One of the topics that's really hot in our world at the moment, which I think is damaging the sales across the board in SEO, is people thinking, oh, we don't need SEO now that we've got AI. There's some research that shows that AI LLMs, the learning parts of it, they rely more on your website to find out information about your topics and your company than Google does. And increasingly, even ChatGPT does it now. The chat AIs are being forced to give prove the sources. So putting good content on your website would matter now more than ever. Yeah. And amplifying your excellence by doing that matters now more than ever. AI is not going to kill SEO. We'll just stop calling it SEO. We can finally call it, I hate the phrase SEO because it should just be called do good stuff.
Do good stuff.
Do good stuff.
That gets rewarded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's good.
Yeah. So what are people looking at in terms of AI? I mean, are you talking about AI generated content on their website? Is that being rewarded, or is Google sniffing that out? Does that even matter if it's written by a human or ChatGPT, et cetera?
It's something that amuses quite a lot of us in the world of SEO, because a couple of years ago, people went, wow, we'll just use AI to create tons of content. And they slathered it all over their website. And then their website started tanking. And the reaction a lot of people had to that was going, Google must hate AI content. The truth of the matter, well, my opinion of the matter, it's not guesswork, it's experience here. I sounded big-headed, but my assessment, and in the conversations I have with my peers, is that putting AI content on your website doesn't really matter. What matters is how useful that content is. And Google have said the same thing. Google has an AI content generating tool called Bard. So they're not just going to say no, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot. But it's the same as anything else you do with your online presence. If you make enough of an effort, you'll get a good enough output. So you mentioned my company name. It's yeseo.io. I chose IO because in tech language, it means input, output. Put good stuff in, get good stuff out. Yeah. If you go to ChatGPT and just type the prompt, write me an article about Apple sellers in New York, it's going to go and give you an article. If you write a really long prompt explaining who the target audience is, what it is you want to get across, what you want the tone of the article to be, and even better, if you've trained a custom GPT, so one of the ones that you can train, and you've put books into it, because you can ask GPT to read books on subjects, and you've gone and got the latest research, and then you say to ChatGPT, write me an article on this, then that article is probably going to be pretty good. I said about algorithm updates, how we don't really care, but there is one that's worth paying attention to. Google made a lot of noise about 12, 14 months ago about an update they call the helpful content update. And it's all about this. They are looking at a page saying, is this helpful to the person looking for information on this topic? And that's all it's ever been. But now they're just making it really clear. And it wasn't called the helpful content, but don't use AI update.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure some people are misinterpreting that or jumping to a conclusion, making a mistake.
There's always someone who will try and make a few quid out of confusion. I think it's probably one of the biggest issues in SEO is that there's a lot of snake oil out there.
And it seems like that's been the case for a while. I mean, why does that survive or even thrive in some cases? I wonder.
Because it's seen by some people as a get-rich-quick scheme. If you're going to take on a client and charge them astronomical amounts of money, and agencies in the US charge probably 5 to 10 times more than European agencies. If I can do that and just click a button and give the client something, then I'll get rich. Or if I outsource absolutely everything with no control or whatever, and that's my assessment anyway. I mean, seniority is something that people go on about in SEO. So I've mentioned already, I've just happened to drop in. I've done it for nearly 30 years. Yeah. That's not really very important. What's important is people's attitude to SEO. Because if the attitude is, I'm going to do my absolute best for that client to make sure that their website is the absolute best for their audience, then I don't care how long someone's done SEO for. That's at the heart of what will succeed. And well, in the industry, we can spot the grifters a mile off. They make promises. I'm going to make a video about this at some point, which will make me probably quite unpopular with a lot of people. But what they can do, hack me?
Well, don't tempt. Don't tempt them.
I shouldn't say that, should
I? But as we're and the same would apply to podcasting. Podcasting is not a get rich quick scheme for most people. It's not a get rich anytime scheme. But here on this podcast, I'm trying to do good work and provide helpful content, and a lot of that comes from it's because of guests like you, Andrew. Tell us about your podcast, though, the Business Amplifier podcast.
The Business Amplifier podcast is a podcast for business owners or people in marketing who feel stuck. There's a lot of podcasts out there for people who are just starting a business or for people who are at the absolute top of their game. I realize there's not many podcasts, or it's a YouTube channel as well. There's not many podcasts for people who have done really well, but have just either sort of run out of gas or they just keep hitting against that ceiling and just not knowing how to get past that. So the Business Amplifier podcast is for stuck businesses to bring in fresh thinking, introduce new ideas, and to look at some things around just general well-being. Mm-hmm. Because I mentioned earlier that I would have burnt out if I hadn't had that business hacked to pieces. And that's another real positive, actually. That made me really look at how well I was looking after myself. Mm-hmm. So that's who the Business Amplifier podcast is for. No jargon, no nonsense, just nice, short, bite-sized chunks of juicy information.
All right. Well, I hope people will check that out. And you mentioned videos, Andrew. There's a YouTube channel I will put a link to in the show notes, but look for Yeseo-agency on YouTube. Final question. It's suggested in your Podmatch profile. We've talked a little bit about your music already. I'm going to ask your opinion here. Who is the best band of all time?
The Replacements.
And why do you say the Replacements? That's probably not a popular answer if we asked 1,000 people that question.
In the UK, no one knows who they are, but I'm originally from the punk scene. The Replacements, because it doesn't matter what sort of music you like, you can find it in the Replacements. The early stuff's like Black Flag, or like hardcore punk. The later stuff's like Bon Jovi. I hate to say it, but like Bon Jovi, they've got electronic bits in there. They've got bits like Dylan. They've got folk. It's all there. And you go through their entire back catalogue of albums, and you can hear them develop and learn. I think they're a fascinating band.
American band. I just Googled. I was confusing them with another band from Ireland, maybe with a a similar name, or I was just making a mistake there. What would you say is? I'm trying to come off the top of my head. What would you say is their biggest hit?
Biggest hit is Can't Hardly Wait. It's called. And that's one that will appeal possibly to fans of Simon and Garfunkel. They're very, very broad band. Minneapolis they were from.
Yes. All right. So I'm going to play out song. I'm sure it's one of these things where I hear the song and it will click. And right, there we go. The replacements. But Andrew, it's been great having you here on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your stories and your reflections. I'm sure not the thing that's most fun to talk about, but I appreciate you and all of our guests being willing to share those stories and especially how you bounce back.
Mark, it's the first time I've told the story, certainly outside of just conversations with people who are sat in a room with me. So thanks for giving me the platform to share.
Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here. So again, Andrew Laws has been our guest. Look for links in the show notes or go to yeseo.io. This has been great. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Andrew Laws for being here today. To learn more about him, his company, and more, go look for links in the show notes or go to markgraban.com/mistake310. As always, I want to thank you for listening. I hope this podcast inspires you to reflect on your own mistakes, how you can learn from them or turn them into a positive. I've had listeners tell me they started being more open and honest about mistakes in their work. And they're trying to create a workplace culture where it's safe to speak up about problems, because that leads to more improvement and better business results. If you have feedback or a story to share, you can email me, myfavoritemistakepodcast@gmail.com. And again, our website is myfavoritemistakepodcast.com.